Okay, this is a crash course on interval notation and an introduction to domain and range. Some of this should be a little familiar to you, especially inequality notation and drawing it on a graph or a number line. So let's just analyze the first two examples and then we'll work some problems together. So starting with the first example, our inequality is that -3 is less than or equal to x is less than 5. So on our graph, we know this less than or equal to means I'm going to have a closed circle, and the less than means I'm going to have an open circle. So at -3 and 5, I have those closed and open circles, and my graph contains all of the points in between them. So if I'm going to write this in interval notation, I'm going to use those same values that are on the end points of the graph, so -3 and 5. And on our closed circles, we're going to have brackets, and on our open circles, we're going to have parentheses. So if we have the or equal to, that means bracket. If it's naked, it doesn't have the or equal to, it's going to be parentheses. Okay. On this other example, x is greater than 2. That means I have open circle and it goes off to infinity. So open circle means I have parentheses, off to infinity, and with infinity, positive or negative, we always use parentheses. So let's do number 1 together. I have that x is less than or equal to 3. So I'm going to draw my graph. The point 3, this is going to be a closed circle, and it goes off to negative infinity. So for my interval notation, we always go from smallest to largest as far as our values go. So it's going to be negative infinity to 3. And remember, with infinity, it's always parentheses. And because I have a closed circle here, it's going to be a square bracket. Okay. Now on the second one, I'm given it in interval notation. It's from negative infinity to 4, and both are parentheses. So let's see what that looks like on a graph. Here's my 4. It's going to be an open circle. And again, it's going off to negative infinity. So in inequality notation, that would be that x is less than 4. Right. Let's do one more together. Number 3, our graph is 2 closed circles from 2 to 6. So my interval notation is going to be 2 brackets because I have 2 closed circles, and I go from smallest value to largest value, so that will be 2, 6. And my inequality would be that 2 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 6. Now let's jump down to number 6 here. I've got x is less than 1 or x is greater than or equal to 5. So let's graph this first, and that should help us determine how to write this in interval notation. So I'm going to draw my number line. Here's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So first, x is less than 1. That's going to be an open circle off to negative infinity. Or x is greater than or equal to 5. That's going to be a closed circle and off to positive infinity. So we're going to actually have 2 intervals to notate here. So let's start with x is less than 1. That's going to look like negative infinity to 1. And I use a parentheses because it's an open circle. My other interval is going to be 5 with a bracket, because it's a closed circle, to positive infinity with a parentheses, because we always use parentheses with infinity. And I'm going to join those together with a U, meaning union. So it's been a while since you learned this in geometry, but union means all of the parts together. So we're putting a U for union of our 2 intervals. Okay, we are going to move on to the next page. We are going to be practicing our interval notation to describe some of the features of graphs. So on number 13 here, we're given the graph f of x, that's our function. What intervals of x, so what x values is f of x increasing? So on what intervals of x is my function increasing? So between what x values are my y values getting bigger? And the way we determine this is by tracing our graph. So I'm going to start from the left and move to the right, and I'm going to follow my graph. And if my values are getting bigger, that means it's increasing. And if my values are getting smaller, it's decreasing. So my function is increasing from down here up to this point here. And that's when it switches from increasing to decreasing. So that arrow means that this is going off to infinity. So if I'm talking about the intervals of x where my graph is increasing, that would be, I'm going to label these A and B to make it easier to tell which one I'm talking about. So for A, I'm increasing from negative infinity with parentheses up to this point. My x value at that point is 0. That's the origin. Now here comes the real question. Am I going to use parentheses or brackets? And the answer is parentheses, because at that point my graph is switching from increasing to decreasing. So it is not increasing or decreasing there, it is switching. So that is going to be a parentheses. Now part B, we want to know on what intervals of x, so again, x values, is f of x positive. So what x values give me a positive f of x? What inputs give me a positive output? So we're looking for where f of x is positive. F of x is going to be our y values. And y is positive when it's above the x-axis. So all of these would be positive values for f of x. And this occurs when x is -2 all the way until x is +2. Again, for part B, we are looking at what x values give me values of my function that are above the x-axis, that are in this highlighted area. And that is from -2 to +2. Those are the x values. Now, determining parentheses or brackets. Remember, we're talking about where our function is positive. At both of these values, our function is on the x-axis, which means that our function is 0. 0 itself is neither positive or negative. So at these 2 points, our graph is not positive. So it's going to be parentheses, because we're just talking about where our graph is positive. Okay? We are going to go on to the next side and talk about domain and range. Domain is our x values, and range is our y values. We have 2 ways that we can represent this information. We can use interval notation, which we've learned, and we can also use inequality notation. You need to know both because on your quizzes and tests, it's going to ask you for one or the other. So first, looking at number 1, let's talk about our x values. We have x values from here to here, and that's at the point -3 and set +7. Now we have closed circles at both of those points, so I'm going to be using brackets. And if I was going to write that in interval notation, I would use my greater than or equal to and less than or equal to. Okay. Now let's talk about our y values. We have y values from here to here. So that is -6 to +3. My graph is a solid line at both of those points. It exists at that point on the graph, so that is brackets. And for interval notation, we're going to use less than or equal to y. Make sure y is what goes in between your inequalities there. Okay. Let's do this one more time on number 2, domain and range. Remember, domain is our x values. So if you look here on the edge of our graph at this -5, that's an open circle. And over here at +5, that's a closed circle. So that's going to be -5 to 5 with a parentheses on the -5 and a bracket on the +5. And of course, we can also write that in inequality notation. And then our range, our y values span from down here at -3 to +3. Now, I have an open circle when y is 3, but I also have a point on this parabola where y is 3. So because there exists a point on this parabola at y equals 3, it negates the open circle at the other value of y being 3. So my range is going to be -3 to +3, bracket, bracket. This value negates the open circle. Okay. I want to talk about some other situations where our open circles are going to interfere with our domain and range. So this is the front side of that third page in your packet, and we're going to take a look at number 11. So first, for our domain, we're going to be going from negative infinity to, we have an open circle here. So our domain on number 11, is going to be from negative infinity, we use parentheses on infinity, to negative 2. And that is going to be a parentheses because it is an open circle. Then we have from negative 2 to positive 1, so union, negative 2 to positive 1. I apologize about that bell. Then lastly, we go from positive 1 off to infinity. So we have 3 different intervals of our domain, and we use that U for union between them. Then our range goes, our y values go from down here at negative infinity to 0, where we have an open circle. And then it goes from 0 to positive 3, where we have our other open circle. And then from our open circle 3 off to infinity. And this entire thing is parentheses because we always use parentheses with infinity, and our open circles also indicate parentheses. Okay, so now I want to show you the homework assignment and what that's going to look like, just so you have an idea of what your expectation is. Some of the questions are going to be asking you to correct the inequality. So here we have a closed circle at 1, so that would be less than or equal to, open circle at 4, so you type in the correct answer. Okay? Other times it's going to be asking you to drag the graph. So here we're dragging, remember solid line is closed circle, dashed line is open circle. So some of the times you're dragging the graph, and again other times you're correcting the inequality. So keep in mind here I have a closed circle, so this should be a less than or equal to. So you find those inequalities on this math keyboard to correct the inequality. And of course you would type in the correct numbers as well. So this should be, we're going to estimate that's like 1.5. And that is the number 1. Oops. And it will demonstrate on the graph what it is you're typing in here. All right, and this assignment is completion. It is for you to learn and understand what is going on. If you have more questions, please come see me.